The snow on Route 12 outside Missoula had been falling since before dawn, and Samuel Voss had been driving since before the snow, and neither of them was stopping. That was the plan. No plan at all, which for Sam had become a kind of plan. Keep moving. Keep the heater on. Let Remy ride shotgun and watch the wheat fields go by, and don't think too hard about the fact that he was 36 years old and driving a Montana back road at 7 in the morning, because the alternative was sitting still. Remy was a 3-year-old Belgian Malinois with a brindle coat and a left ear that stood perfectly straight, and a right ear that had never quite decided, which gave him the permanent expression of a dog asking a question he already knew the answer to. He rode the same way he did everything, economically, without waste, perfectly still. Until he wasn't. Remy stood up, both feet on the dash, nose pressed to the glass, a sound coming out of him that Sam had heard exactly once before. Not a bark, not a whine. Something older than either of those. Something that started low in the chest and meant the dog had already reached a conclusion and was now simply informing Sam of it. Through the windshield, set back from the road behind a cattle gate hanging open on one hinge, a farmhouse sat in the gray morning snow. The porch light was on. On the top step, wrapped in a canvas work coat 2 sizes too large, sat an old man with no coffee and no hat, hands folded in his lap, facing the road as though he had been waiting there for something that was running considerably late. A piece of paper was taped to the front door behind him. Even from the road, Sam could see it was official. The kind of paper that doesn't come with good news. What Samuel Voss and his K9 found inside that house, and what they found behind the name on that foreclosure notice, would uncover something that had been happening to August Bellamy for 2 years, hidden behind a nephew's signature and a bank's paperwork, and the particular silence of a man too proud to tell anyone that he was losing everything he had spent a lifetime building. If you're new here, this is what this channel does. Subscribe before we go further. You'll want to be here when the story lands. Sam had come home from his second deployment with both hands and most of himself, which was more than he'd been guaranteed and less than he'd started with. He didn't say that to people. He said he was fine, which was true in the way that a house with a cracked foundation is fine, standing, functional, not something you'd notice unless you knew where to look. He had grown up in Billings and come back to Montana the way people come back to the places that made them, not because everything was good there, but because the landscape fit the inside of his head in a way that other places didn't. Wide sky, long sight lines, room to see what was coming. He had taken work where he could find it since the discharge. A fence-building crew one summer, a ranch hand position one winter, a few months driving supply routes for a timber operation out of Missoula. Nothing that lasted. Nothing that was supposed to. He drove because driving was the one activity that asked exactly the right amount of him. Enough to keep the front part of his mind occupied, not enough to crowd the back part, where the things that didn't have names lived. Remy rode with him because Remy had decided that was how it was going to be, and Sam had stopped questioning Remy's decisions about 11 months into their time together, after the third occasion on which the dog had been right about something Sam had been wrong about. Remy was not a casual dog. He was not warm with strangers and did not perform affection for people who hadn't earned it. He assessed. He waited. And when he decided someone was worth his attention, he gave it with a totality that was slightly overwhelming if you weren't used to it. Sam had seen grown men get quiet when Remy put his full focus on them, not from fear, from something closer to being seen. August Bellamy had been born in this county and had never left it except for 2 years in Korea at 19, which he didn't talk about, and a single trip to Seattle for his daughter Marie's wedding in 1987, which he talked about only in the context of the traffic, which had horrified him. He was 84 years old and built like a man who had spent 60 years doing physical work and hadn't entirely stopped, broad through the shoulders. Hands that were more callous than skin, a face that had been weathered past the point where weather could do anything more to it. He had farmed this land. Not profitably, not lately, but continuously, the way some men maintain things, not because the math works out, but because the alternative is admitting that the thing is over. He grew hay on 40 of his 112 acres and ran a small cattle operation that had shrunk from 60 head to 11 over 20 years and kept shrinking. And none of that had shaken him. What shook him was the paperwork. Clara had handled the paperwork. Clara had handled most things that required sitting down with reading glasses and a pen, because Gus's reading glasses were always in the wrong room, and his patience for fine print had never been robust. Clara Bellamy had been a practical woman with a gift for the specific kindness of doing quietly what needed doing. She paid the bills and renewed the insurance and kept the deed in a fireproof box under the bed and made coffee at 3 o'clock every afternoon and brought it to the porch, because Gus always ended up there at 3, whether she brought coffee or not, and she had decided early in their marriage that she would rather be where he was than wonder where he'd gone. They had 47 years of 3 o'clock coffee on that porch. Clara died of cancer in the spring, 2 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon with the bedroom window open and the smell of the fields coming through, and Gus holding her hand with both of his, the way he held tools he didn't want to put down. She was 79 years old. She had done everything she'd meant to do and loved everyone she'd meant to love, and she left Gus with the fireproof box and the 11 cattle and the 40 acres of hay and the knowledge, which sat in him like a stone, that 3 o'clock was going to be very quiet from now on. He still went out at 3, not because he expected her. He knew better than to expect her. He went out because 47 years of 3 o'clock had taught his body a direction, and that direction was the porch. And the porch was the last place in the world where the distance between then and now felt smallest. He sat, and he watched the road, and he drank his coffee alone, and he didn't explain it to anyone, because there was nothing to explain. It was simply what 3 o'clock was now. His nephew Darren had arrived 6 months after Clara's funeral with condolences and a briefcase, and the particular energy of a man who has been waiting for a situation to present itself. Darren was 47, worked in real estate in Billings, and had visited the farm exactly 3 times in the previous decade. Twice at Christmas and once to ask Gus for a loan that Gus had given him and that had never been discussed again. He was not a monster. He was the kind of man who was good at telling himself a story about why what he wanted was also what was best for everyone else, which is its own category of dangerous. The reverse mortgage had been Darren's idea, presented as a solution to what Darren described as Gus's financial exposure. The property was worth something. Gus wasn't leveraging it. The payments would give him income. Darren would manage the paperwork, because that was a lot for a man his age to navigate alone, and besides, Darren knew people in finance. Gus had signed where Darren pointed. He had trusted the blood relation the way a man trusts the only bridge over the water, not because he'd inspected it, but because there wasn't another way across. He had not understood that the signature on the secondary authorization form was not his. He had not understood that the equity draws that began 4 months after the closing were larger than any income payment and were going somewhere other than his account. He had not understood any of this until a woman from the bank called in September and spoke to him for 11 minutes in a voice that was carefully neutral in the way that people are carefully neutral when they're delivering information they believe the recipient cannot fully process. The foreclosure notice had arrived on Monday. Gus had read it 3 times on the porch and then folded it and put it in his coat pocket and then taken it back out and taped it to the door, because it seemed like the kind of thing that should be visible. He did not know why. He just felt it should be seen. He had not called anyone. He had no one obvious to call. Marie was in Seattle and had her own life and her own troubles, and Gus was of a generation and a disposition that regarded calling your daughter to announce catastrophe as an imposition. The neighbors were 3 miles in either direction. The pastor of the church up the road, a man named Elias who had done Clara's funeral and who checked on Gus periodically with the gentle persistence of someone who understands that grief does not announce when it needs company. Gus had not called him either. He had come to the porch at 7 in the morning in the snow and the cold because he didn't know what else to do, and doing nothing inside the house felt worse than doing nothing outside of it. That was where Sam found him. On the step. In the cold. Waiting for something he hadn't been able to name. Remy was off the seat before the truck stopped moving. He didn't run. He covered the distance from the truck to the porch steps with the particular focused efficiency of a dog who is not exploring, but arriving. As if the destination had been decided before the truck had, and he was simply closing the distance between where he was and where he was supposed to be. He sat down at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at Gus Bellamy and waited. Gus looked down at the dog. He looked at Sam coming up the drive behind him. He looked back at the dog. "Yours?" he said. "He goes where he wants," Sam said. Which was not quite true, and was exactly true. Remy climbed the 3 steps without an invitation, and sat next to Gus's right knee and put his head against the old man's arm. And Gus, after a moment that was neither short nor long, put his weathered hand on top of the dog's head and left it there. Sam looked at the notice on the door. He read it in the time it took to read it, which was not long, and understood it in the time it took to understand it, which was also not long. "When this go up?" he said. "Monday," Gus said. "Today's Thursday." "I know what day it is," Gus said, without heat, just precision. Sam nodded. He sat down on the step below Gus's and looked at the road and the snow-covered fields and the cattle gate hanging open on its single functioning hinge. He was not a social worker. He was not a lawyer. He had been driving a back road in the snow with no destination and no plan, and his dog had stood up in a moving vehicle, and that was the sum total of his qualifications for being here. It was enough. It had always been enough. He asked if he could come in and get warm. The inside of the house was 58 degrees. The furnace had been making a sound for 3 weeks that Gus had been putting off addressing because the repair estimate was $400, and the account that used to cover things like that had been quietly emptying for 6 months. The kitchen was clean. The dishes were done. On the counter, a coffee maker with 1 mug beside it. 1, not 2, which was the smallest possible monument to a life rearranged. Remy walked through the kitchen and stopped at the door to the back hallway, then looked at Sam with the particular expression that meant, "This is the thing." Sam followed him. The hallway led to a small office, Clara's by the look of it, with a roll-top desk and a green-shaded lamp and a fireproof box sitting open on the surface, with its contents spread around it in the organized disarray of someone trying to understand a document they'd been reading for 3 days. Bank statements. The reverse mortgage closing packet, an authorization form with a signature line at the bottom. Sam picked up the authorization form. He was not a forensic examiner, but he had seen Gus Bellamy write his name in the maintenance log of the county extension office on the way in, and the signature on this form was not the same signature. The letters were similar in shape and different in everything else. Pressure. Slant. The particular hesitation of a man who writes slowly and deliberately rather than the fluid confidence of a man who signs things for a living. He set it down without saying anything yet. Gus had come to the hallway door. He stood there with his coffee mug and looked at the desk and at Sam and at Remy, who had not moved from his position beside the open fireproof box. "Did you sign this one?" Sam asked, pointing to the authorization form. Gus looked at it for a moment. "Darren said I did," he said. Something in Sam went very still. He did not say what he was thinking. He asked Gus if he had any coffee left, and Gus said he did. And they went back to the kitchen and sat down, and Remy came and lay across Sam's feet and faced the door, and Sam asked Gus to tell him about the farm. "Is there someone in your life who's been quietly losing something, piece by piece, and hasn't told anyone? Someone you've been meaning to check on and keep finding reasons to put it off? Type yes in the comments if you know someone like that. Then go check on them after this. Tonight, not tomorrow." What came out of August Bellamy over the next hour was not a complaint. It was a life. He talked about the cattle and the hay and the particular satisfaction of work that is physical and visible and leaves something behind at the end of a day. He talked about Clara, not about her death, about her. The way she kept the books and the way she laughed at things that weren't quite funny, just slightly wrong in a way that caught her off guard. The 3 o'clock coffee. The 47 years of the porch. He talked about Thomas. He said the name the way parents say the names of children they have outlived, briefly, with a kind of care, the way you handle something you can't put down and can't afford to drop. Thomas Bellamy had served with the Marines, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines. He had been 24 years old, and he had been in Helmand Province, and he had not come home. That was in 2011. Gus said it flat, because there was no other way to say it that didn't cost more than he had to spend on a Thursday morning with a stranger in his kitchen. Sam set his coffee mug down. He knew that name, not from a file, not from a memorial wall, from a specific morning in a specific valley, when a sergeant named Bellamy had gone through a doorway ahead of him, and Sam had heard the shot and the silence. And the silence had lasted for 9 years inside him, quiet and permanent, the way certain silences do. He sat with it for a moment. Then he told Gus. Gus went very still. Remy stood up from Sam's feet and walked to Gus's chair and sat down against his leg and did not move. The two men sat in the kitchen of the farmhouse with the snow coming down outside and the furnace making its troubled sound, and the authorization form with the wrong signature sitting on the desk down the hall, and the distance between them, which had been the distance between a stranger and a man who hadn't asked for company, became something else entirely and smaller. "He was good," Gus said finally. "He was a good boy." "He was," Sam said. "I know that for a fact." Sam called a woman named Janet Kowalski that afternoon, a legal aid attorney in Missoula who specialized in elder financial abuse, and who had, in the 5 years since she opened her practice, seen 3 cases involving forged authorization signatures on reverse mortgage documents, and had won all 3. She asked Sam to photograph everything in the office and send it to her encrypted email before end of day. He did. She called back in 2 hours and said the signature discrepancy was clear, enough that a handwriting analyst wasn't going to be a long process, and that the bank's liability exposure was significant enough that their legal department would likely move to correct the situation before it became a court record. She also said that Darren Wills, Gus's nephew, had filed a change of address form on the account 5 months ago, redirecting the equity draw payments to a Billings address, and that this was the kind of detail that stopped being civil and started being criminal fairly quickly. She said she would need Gus's participation, and she said it carefully. The way people say things to Sam when they're not sure how much the old man can handle. Sam said, "He's fine. He just needs someone to stand with him. Janet said she could be there Saturday morning. On Friday, Darren Wills arrived. Sam had not called him. Sam had called Janet, and Janet had called the bank, and the bank had called the loan servicer, and the loan servicer had called the number on file, which was Darren's number. And Darren had driven 3 hours from Billings because he understood, the way people understand when their arrangements begin to unravel, that he was running out of time to control the story. He pulled into the drive at 11:47, a silver SUV, clean despite the weather. Billings plates. He sat in it for 2 minutes before he got out, which was 2 minutes of a man deciding what version of himself to walk in as. The kitchen had 4 people in it. Gus sat at his own table, in his own chair, with his coffee. Pastor Elias, who had driven the 3 miles from the church the moment Sam called him Thursday evening, and had arrived with firewood and a repaired furnace contact. A man in his congregation did heating work, sat across from Gus with his hands around a mug. Janet Kowalski stood near the counter with a legal pad and a recorder and the quiet authority of a woman who has done this before and knows exactly how it goes. Sam stood by the hallway door. Remy was at Gus's feet when Darren walked in. He was not there by the time Darren reached the kitchen table. He had moved. Not to the door, not blocking it, between Gus's chair and where Darren would have to stand to address Gus directly. Positioned, feet planted, the continuous low sound starting before Darren's coat was fully off. The sound that was not alarm, but verdict. His eyes did not move from Darren's face. His feet did not shift. He was a fact in the room, physical and immovable, and Darren felt him before he saw him, and stopped walking before he meant to. Darren looked at the room. His face moved through several arrangements before settling on the one that said this was all a misunderstanding. "Uncle Gus," he said. "I came as soon as I heard there was, Darren," Gus said. He said it the way he said everything, once level, with the economy of a man who had spent 84 years deciding which words were worth saying. "I stopped locking the door. Nobody comes anyway." He said it to the table. Not to Darren, not to Sam. To the kitchen and the farm and the 3 o'clock porch and the 47 years and the son who didn't come home and the wife who left on a Tuesday with the window open. He said it for all of it, and the room received it in complete silence, and Darren's prepared version of events did not survive the sentence. Remy took 1 step forward. Darren did not take 1 step forward. Janet Kowalski set her legal pad on the counter and picked up her recorder and introduced herself by name and bar number and began to explain, in the measured and precise language of someone who is not performing and is not threatening, but is simply describing what is true and what will happen next, exactly what the document review had found and what the bank had been notified of, and what the county attorney's office would be receiving on Monday morning. She spoke for 4 minutes. Darren said nothing. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Sam looked at Darren Wills, not with anger, because anger was not the thing that had gotten him out of that truck and up this driveway and into this kitchen. He looked at him the way you look at the specific thing that caused a damage you've decided to repair. Carefully, without drama. "You'll want to call a lawyer before Monday," Sam said. "That's the only advice I've got for you." Darren left without another word. Remy watched the door until the sound of the silver SUV had faded completely down the road. Then he walked back to Gus's chair and sat down against the old man's leg and exhaled. A long, slow breath. The breath of a dog who has been very alert for a long time and has just received confirmation that the alertness is no longer required. Gus put his hand on Remy's head. "Good dog," he said quietly. It was the first time Sam had heard him say those words to anyone. The bank initiated a loan correction by the following Wednesday, pending the forgery investigation. Darren Wills retained an attorney and said very little publicly. The county attorney's office opened a file. None of it happened quickly, because justice rarely does, but it happened, which is a different thing entirely from the world Gus had been living in on the morning the foreclosure notice went up. The furnace was repaired on Friday. The temperature rose to 68 degrees, and Gus stood in the kitchen when the heat came on and closed his eyes briefly and said nothing. And Sam understood that some things don't need a word put on them. Pastor Elias came back on Sunday with 2 men from the congregation who were handy. The cattle gate was rehung. The fence line on the north pasture was repaired in an afternoon. Nobody made a ceremony of it. They came and worked and ate the soup Gus made, which was very good, and left. There are moments that feel less like coincidence and more like arrangement, like the road and the dog and the name in the kitchen had all been moving toward the same place for a long time, and the only variable was whether the truck stopped. Sam stayed through December. He told himself it was the fence work, and then the cattle, and then Gus's transmission problem, and all of those things were true, and none of them were the reason. The reason was the 3 o'clock porch. He had started going out at 3 without meaning to, the first time because he didn't know what 3 o'clock meant in that house, and then because he did. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they watched the fields and the road and the blue quality of late Montana winter light, and that was enough. More than enough. Remy lay across both their feet, and his breathing was the only sound for long stretches, and neither of them had any interest in filling it with something smaller. What Sam Voss did that morning was not a decision. He had no plan to stop. He had a dog with his nose to the cold glass, and a foreclosure notice on a farmhouse door, and 9 years of a name he had been carrying without knowing where to put it. Some debts can't be repaid to the person who has owed them. They can only be carried forward until you find the place where they belong. He simply stopped. This story is for every person who has been quietly holding a door open, for a memory, for a person, for a thing they are not ready to let go of yet. You are not wrong to hold it. And for anyone who passed a cold porch this winter and kept driving, it is not too late to turn around. Is there someone who has quietly been losing something, the way August Bellamy was losing everything, and has not said a word to anyone? Someone who would never ask? Leave their name in the comments. Or just leave a yes. I'll see you there. Every story on this channel is about what happens when someone stops. If that matters to you, subscribe. There are more stories waiting, and you will want to be here for the next one. Which moment in this story will you carry with you? I'll see you in the comments.